This week we turn to number 12 in our studies, going through 1st and 2nd Corinthians. Now we're in 2nd Corinthians, and this one's entitled Dealing with False Teachers. And yes, that was something that Paul already had to start working with, because even though this was very much early days for Christianity, there were already people who were going kind of off on different tangents and suggesting different things, and there were many different kinds of heresies, if you want to call them that, already creeping into the church. There were people who believed you basically had to become a Jew before you could become a Christian. They were the Judaizers who insisted on people following all the regulations that applied in the Old Testament. And then there were some people who also wanted to go down the route of, let's be more similar to what we already know from Greek philosophy, and let's start adopting some of those ideas and bring them in and influence Christianity in that way. And there are others besides all of that. So as we look at 2 Corinthians chapters 10 and 11 and 12, there's a lot to cover there, obviously. We need to think about what really we should do when it comes to the problem of people who are not really following biblical doctrine. And he even says in verse 1 and on of chapter 10, "This is me, Paul, personally appealing to you through Christ's kindness and gentleness, the one who is shy when I have to face you, but who is bold when I'm not there." That's obviously an accusation made against him. "I'm pleading with you so that next time I'm with you, I won't have to be so tough as I think I'll have to be, boldly dealing with those who think we behave in worldly ways. Even though we live in this world, we don't fight as the world does." Let's give up any use of worldly ways, attitudes, procedures, all those kinds of things, way that we attack one another and so on. Our weapons are not of this world. That's not what we are going to be doing. So when people come and complain about Paul, he says, people say, verse 10, "His letters are tough and severe, but in person he's feeble and he's a useless speaker." I don't really think that was true, but that's the accusation. And then he goes on talking about not being so arrogant to compare ourselves with those who think so much of themselves. We're not going to be in a pride competition trying to say, well, we're better than those. Those who measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves are really foolish. You know, it's not the way that we are going to operate. We simply measure what we have done using God's system of measurement that he gave us, and that includes you. And in that sense, the people there in Corinth are the testimony to what Paul has done. The very fact that they're there speaks volumes as to Paul's ministry. And then he talks about how other believers come in and share something that isn't the same. Look at chapter 11, verse 4. "If anyone comes and tells you about a different Jesus to the one we shared with you, you easily go along with them, accepting a different spirit to the one you received, and a different kind of good news to the one you believed." You can't switch and change, and the basic essence of the good news is the character of God that is revealed in Jesus, and you have to stick to that. You can't bring in all these other things. And he says in verse 5, "I don't believe I'm inferior to these super apostles." He uses a very interesting term there in the Greek. "And even though I might not be a good speaker, I do know what I'm talking about." And he says that I was never meant to be a burden to you. And I think what he's talking about is both in a spiritual sense and also physically in terms of being dependent, because there was another accusation that Paul was profiting from his ministry, and that by doing what he did, he was enhancing his own wealth and so on. So no, I'm not going to do that. And he says, I'm going to do what I've always done. And these people who want to boast that their work is the same as ours, these people are false apostles, dishonest workers who pretend to be apostles of Christ. And we don't even have time to get into chapter 12, where he's talking about boasting and explaining what his particular understanding is. And he talks about his own vision and the way that God has blessed him. But anyway, for the moment, let's think about dealing with one another with courtesy and tact, but being very firm to speak about the truth about God as revealed in Jesus, because that is the character of God. As Jesus himself said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.